Hello, welcome to my Coors Field presentation. You can see Coors Field in front of you now, but I'm going to ask that you take a moment to look away from the stadium, to look away from the slide, and just listen to me for a couple of moments as I acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is, of course, the fact that this is not the usual kind of presentation that I give. Most of my presentations are live. I have a live audience that I hold captive and force to laugh and smile and giggle and quip to my heart's content. I don't have that with me today. This is completely recorded. I do not have a live audience. It's just me. And so there are a couple of elements, a couple of sounds that I've incorporated into this presentation to hopefully make it more intimate, give more of a live studio feel. And so there are a couple of sounds. We're just going to go through them now that you should be looking out for over the course of this presentation. And I'll explain right now what they are and what they mean so that when they come up, you'll know how to feel. The first sound is this. Whenever you hear that sound, that means that something impactful or suspenseful is happening. And if you're watching this, or listening to this rather, not watching, maybe you're doing homework, maybe you're doing the dishes and you've just got this playing in the background, hearing that sound should tell you to lock in, wake up a little bit and maybe glance over and see, what the slide at hand is and listen to the next couple moments intently as we go through this presentation. The next sound is this sound. And whenever you hear that sound, that just means you should laugh. I would appreciate it if you would. Something funny is happening, or at least something that I find funny is happening. And if you would go hee 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 or something like that, exactly like that actually, just hee 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 hee, I would really appreciate that. I can't hold you to that. I'm just gonna choose to believe that you're doing that. I have no proof, but I would appreciate it if you would go along and go hee 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 every time you hear that sound. And the final sound is this. And whenever you hear that sound, that just means I'm lying to you. I'm lying to you through my teeth. There will be many times over the course of this presentation which I find it expedient to lie to you, mostly for my own amusement, but there may be a couple of moments in which it is just difficult to explain a complicated subject to people who are new to baseball in so quick a time. And in such clear phrasing. And so there may be times in which I just lie to make it easier, and maybe we'll get back around to it and you'll learn the truth. But maybe not, that's not something I have to do. You may just stay ignorant forever, and that's the risk you take. You're gonna have to make your peace with that. And so without any further ado, those are the elements of the presentation, and let's just get right into it, because I think that Coors Field is a magical place. This is the aerial view of Coors Field, and you can see downtown Denver, of course, in the background here. This is the view from inside the ballpark, presumably the third deck, overlooking home plate outwards into the rest of Denver. And this is the exterior view where you can just see the brick facade here and how it looks to presumably walk around the square and into the ballpark for the first time. Now, why do I think that ballparks are interesting? Well, ballparks are not designed the way every other stadium in other sports is designed. They all tend to look the same. They'll have different colors for whatever team, but for the most part, all football stadiums follow the same design principles. All NHL arenas look the same. All basketball stadiums look the same. They all basically follow the same design principles. And though the colors are different, though the banners of the players that the team have that they hang all around the stadium will be different, generally the structure is the same. And I think that's pretty uninteresting personally. Ballparks, however, baseball is one of the only sports to not have any standardized dimensions. All ballparks have different shapes and sizes as they fit themselves differently into their respective cities and have to adjust to whatever the natural confines are, both in the city and neighborhood that they're in, and also whatever weather conditions they may face. So, for example, T-Mobile Park runs a little bit larger. The field itself is a little bit above average, but not grotesquely so. However, the actual full size of the stadium runs quite large because they have to fit a retractable roof because it rains there a lot. So that's one example of how they have to fit into a neighborhood. And we'll get more into that as we go through the history of ballpark architecture, because it is a very fascinating history and a very rich one, I feel. But that still begs the question of why Coors Field? Why Coors Field specifically? And I'll get into that later when we talk about the unique things about Coors Field that make it so different, very, very different from every other major league ballpark that we have today. But before we get into that, I do think it would be important to give some context and go through the history so that you have a frame of reference to understand why all of these things matter. The last thing I want to just say before we get into that is ballparks are different. They're the only type of stadium that has park in it, and for good reason, because historically baseball has been seen as a leisurely sport. You know, if I want to go see a football game, I have to plan that shit out. They're going to play on one day, Sunday. The tickets are going to be really expensive because they don't play many games, and everyone's going to want to go out to see it all on the same day. Tickets get pricey very quickly. You got to plan that shit out. Baseball is different. They play 162 games in a season. That's a lot of games. Basically, any given day during the summer, I can feel pretty confident that there's probably a game today. And if I get out at work early and I've got a couple of my work buddies with me, I can say, hey, why don't we go to the ballpark? And I've done this many times. I can say, hey, let's just go out. You know, there's probably a game on. Sure enough, there will be. And we can get tickets pretty cheap because they play so many games. You know, not everybody is expected to show out for every game. And on any given day, you can basically expect to go over and get tickets pretty cheap. And I think that's just a magical thing. I think that the ability for ballparks not just to be a place of entertainment, but also a place for community space, you know, a place where you can just go and people watch and vibe and feel the warm summer breeze on a nice day. I think that's really cool. I think the fact that they do function as parks, that you can just go and not pay any attention to the game at all, or go and pay a little bit of attention, just do some homework, play some video games, and then occasionally look up and see something really cool happen and, you know, feed yourself on the vibes of the people around you. I think that's really cool. I think that's really neat. I love going to baseball stadiums in a way that, you know, I don't feel the same when I go see other sports. You know, when I go to Chase Center and see the Warriors play, I'm just locked in. You know, I don't give a fuck. They could be playing in Timbuktu for all I care. But when I go to see the Giants at Oracle Park, it is peak San Francisco. Like, I'm here. All my boys are here. It's the community, and we're just vibing. We're just vibing in a civic space, and I think that's really cool. Now, the history of ballparks and some of the architectural fashions that they've gone through over time. Next slide. This is Rickwood Field. It is the oldest, still actively used for professional purposes stadium in North America. And I think that's really cool for one. It's located in Birmingham, Alabama, and it was home to the Negro League Birmingham Black Barons, where Willie Mays used to play. This is a very small stadium. It is kind of the archetypical Southern stadium from before they sort of made the massive, big, modern ballparks that we would know today. This only fit, I believe, 8,000 people, perhaps even lower than that these days, as it's gone smaller. It still stands. It's still used professionally by a minor league team, which I think is really cool. And you can definitely see the small scale. These were the first stadiums built for like professional baseball and for, you know, popular consumption for people to go out and see, big leaguers play. And you can definitely see how at this time it was just on a much smaller scale. And this was sort of how Southern ballparks looked. You can just see the humidity all around. This is the Palace of the Fans in Cincinnati, Ohio. You can see how, they were a little bit more ambitious with this. This was a archetypical northern baseball stadium at the time. And this only fit, it looks a lot more grand, it looks a lot more spectacular, but it didn't fit that many more people, compared about 8,000 or so to 10,000 or so. And so even though you can see packed crowds, people really came out to see, I believe it would have been the Reds at this time, I believe. I may be wrong about that. They came out to see them play. But this is like 10,000 people strong, They don't have the third deck. You can only see the front, the front part of it. It doesn't have the massive concourse that we would see today. And so this was baseball stadium's humble beginnings. I would argue that it really got started with the jewel box era, which we'll just go into now. So this right here was Comiskey Park in Chicago. Comiskey Park, home of the White Sox for a very, very, very long time. And you can see, just like compare the two, small scale. You can see how it expanded a good bit more, how the outfield became a fully fledged seating area of its own. And this is very important because as ballparks changed to honestly just kind of adjust to the live ball era, back in this day, this was the dead ball era. Home runs were not if it went out of the park. Half of these stadiums didn't even really have like strong outfield walls. Usually home runs were just if you would round all of the bases, and you were just fast enough to do that. And so defined outfields where hitting it out of the park would be a home run became one of the fixtures of the live ball era and of the jewel box design for ballparks. Now, what defined the jewel box era is very important. We'll just go through a couple of more jewel box stadiums so you can see some of the similarities. This is what I think a lot of people remember as one of the definitive jewel box stadium designs. It's Ebbets Field. You can see how, this is much, much bigger than the Palace of the Fans or Rickwood Field. But compared to the stadiums of today, the jewel box stadiums were still very much of human scale. They were definitely the reason why I would argue that they were the beginning of the modern stadium design is because they just had the capacity to fit popular demand. Compared to the Palace of the Fans' 10,000 occupancy, Ebbets Field had about 30,000 upwards of, and most jewel box stadiums of the time and the ones that still remain today did. You can see some of the dimensions that define jewel box stadiums. Again, a lot bigger than the Palace of the Fans, but also pretty compact. They had specific dimensions they got to fit, and that more loosey-goosey outfield. We'll get to that. That more loosey-goosey outfield, that right field wall, that was not like, not every stadium looked like that. That was a unique feature of Ebbets Field. And all jewel box stadiums had these unique designs. Again, baseball was the only sport where you didn't have standardized designs. One, Ebbets Field's, I don't know this for a fact, but Ebbets Field's left field might be about, 380 feet, let's say. The left field in the Polo Grounds might be 350, which is a considerable difference, but that was just how it was back then. There would be massive disparities in the dimensions of ballparks because they had to fit to the confines of their neighborhood. Ebbets Field was a neighborhood ballpark. They didn't put it in a suburb. They didn't put it in a big hill full of parking. They put it in a neighborhood. You can see how there are houses around it where people lived and where people, were influenced by the ballpark being right there. And so in order to meet those confines, they had to shape ballparks in pretty weird ways. They had to have drastically different dimensions, and that gave a unique character to every single ballpark. They all had their own personality as a result of the neighborhood they were in and the confines that they had to meet. We'll go to some other jewel box designs, but that's where the name comes from. The idea was that jewel box stadiums fit snugly into their neighborhoods as a jewel box, and I think that's cool. I just think that's neat. I'm a big lover of jewel box designs, but of course they didn't last. Ebbets Field would eventually fall apart. Ebbets Field, how do I say this? These days, it's kind of people like to remember it as this big, beautiful ballpark, as the shining beacon on a hill. And a lot of jewel box stadiums are remembered like this because this was one architectural fashion, and the next one would come. Ebbets Field, where the Dodgers played, they were the Brooklyn Dodgers at this time, would be demolished as the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles in the late 50s. And the 50s and 60s, just in general, were a time of great change for the MLB. A lot of relocation was happening. A lot of these jewel box stadiums, these cathedrals to baseball, started to fall into disrepair. And teams were like, hey, city, give me money. And sometimes the cities would say yes. A lot of the times they would say no, or they would say maybe, or they would say yes with an asterisk, we'll do it only if you do X, Y, Z. And so a lot of teams started leaving. They started relocating. The Dodgers and the Giants would leave New York and move out west and become the Los Angeles Dodgers and the San Francisco Giants, respectively. The Braves would move to Milwaukee from Boston and become the Milwaukee Braves, and then they would move again just a short time later into Atlanta and become the Atlanta Braves. And every time they did this, they would get a new ballpark, and that new ballpark wouldn't be a jewel box design. It would follow usually the modernist idea of what we would call concrete donuts, if we're being charitable. I personally am more partial to the term concrete ashtray. I think that's a little more accurate. But yeah, a lot of these jewel box stadiums started to fall into disrepair, and they started to get demolished and be abandoned for a new architectural fashion. Yes, jewel box design. And so there are a few that still remain. This is Wrigley Field. This is where the Cubs play. And it is one of the two remaining jewel box stadiums. They've played in it for over 100 years. It's going to be an example for what jewel box stadiums looked like when we go on, because we know what it looked like. It still stands. But it is one of the few remaining ones that still stand. This is Fenway. This is the other one that still remains. It's even older than Wrigley Field. The Red Sox have played here for forever. And you can see just how closely ingratiated it is into the neighborhood. You can see it especially with Fenway, but you can see it in Wrigley too. How there are, all of those places around it, that's housing. People have been living here for as long as Wrigley Field has been there. And you can see how the neighborhood has adjusted to the existence of Wrigley Field. You can see the bleachers on top of these apartments, where landlords would construct them and say, hey, we'll charge lower ticket prices, pay us instead of the Cubs, and you can go see a Cubs game from the bleachers on top of these apartments, which is so funny. It's so funny. Only in America could you do this. And I just think it's goofy, but you can see how the neighborhood adjusts. You can see how this is a neighborhood ballpark. There was a pre-existing neighborhood that they entered and that they had to fit snugly into. And you can see it even more closely with Fenway. Fenway is so closely packed into the dimensions of Boston. Like, you couldn't build Fenway Park anywhere else. And that's one of the reasons why they've stayed there for forever. And any attempts to move out of Fenway Park haven't been very successful by the Red Sox. They've been stuck here forever. They will probably never leave. And it's not that they probably wouldn't like to try as much as it just wouldn't be possible with how dense Boston is. Like, they are stuck here. But of course, the jewel box stadiums, they fell into disrepair. They were demolished. Even the ones that weren't in bad quality, like Ebbets Field, wasn't that bad when it got demolished. And this is the demolition of Ebbets Field, because again, I feel like it's so indicative of the jewel box era. It's the one that people glazed the most, and the one that people think about the most fondly as representing a bygone era of the golden age of baseball during the 50s and 60s. And, you know, I have a lot of mixed opinions about many of the jewel box designs. Some of them were bad, but I think a lot of them were pretty good. And more importantly, I think a lot of them were urbanist. You can see just how much this design suits itself to blending into an urban environment and being a good neighbor within a broader neighborhood. I think it's just very urbanist to design your ballparks in this way, and I fuck with that heavy. I ain't gonna lie. Another important thing about why I think the jewel box designs were, I shouldn't say better, but they had a certain charm to them, is that even though they were much, much larger, as you can see, than the Rickwood Fields, than the Palace of the Fans, they were still very much smaller than what we have today. This is, Wrigley Field and Fenway Park both about, upwards of 30,000 occupancy. But the modern ballpark today is 40,000, 50,000, a lot more. And so one of the things that people talk about when they talk about the jewel box era, and they especially love talking about this when they're glazing Ebbets Field. Again, this may sound weird to people who aren't used to ballpark discourse, but Ebbets Field is one of the most glazed ballparks of all time. Like, fucking Frank Sinatra wrote a song about how much he missed Ebbets Field. That's true. It's called There Used to Be a Ballpark There. You can go listen to it. Like, these things meant a lot to a lot of people, and Ebbets Field in particular meant a lot to the borough of Brooklyn when the Dodgers were playing there. It's very sentimentalized, and these institutions mean a lot to people, and so that's why I bring it up a lot. But that's not the end all be all here. There's just a reason why people talk about it a lot, and when they talk about what they loved about Ebbets Field, what they love about Fenway Park, what they love about Wrigley Park, or Wrigley Field, excuse me, one of the things that they talk about is how intimate it was, how you could be sitting at home plate and distinctly make out the face of the person sitting all the way on the other side of the field. That's how tight it was. And that's what helped give it a neighborhood feel, because you could see your neighbors there and you could bond over that shared love of the team and of the city. And I will say that is definitely something that you will not find in modern ballpark designs. And we'll get to that when we get to that. But it is an important part of the jewel box designs that they were compact, that they were designed to fit into a pre-existing neighborhood, and that, relatively speaking to the ballparks that we have today, intimate feel of being able to make out every individual person in that stadium and revel in that shared community experience. But of course, it was not to end, or it was not to last. Most of these ballparks got demolished. Only two remain. There are some understandable examples of this, like the Polo Grounds. Oh my God, the Polo Grounds. That was if you ever want to just fucking lose your mind at a ballpark, the Polo Grounds were crazy. They had an abnormally large center field. It went way too deep. But yeah, most of these got demolished, unfortunately, and it is a little bit of a tragedy. A lot of baseball history was lost, and what replaced them was awful. was fucking awful. So this is Dodger Stadium here. This is where this is what the Dodgers gave up Ebbets Field for. They moved all the way out to Los Angeles for this, and you can see in this aerial view just how fucking awful this is. Just first of all, no neighborhood feel. They demolished the entire neighborhood in order to make this. It's not like there were any pre-existing communities here, thankfully. They found a completely empty plot of land, and they didn't do anything wrong ever in order to build Dodger Stadium. It was completely ethically built, and there were no problems with it whatsoever. However, you can still see a lot of the problems here. For one, the sea of parking, atrocious. For two, just how far away they built it from the rest of like downtown LA, like just how completely divorced it is from the city center. That sucks, and I hate it. And you should hate it too. But also, they were not unique for doing this. This is actually probably still one of the better options of the modernist concrete ashtrays that were so popular at the time. And it was not alone. This is San Francisco, California, and this is Candlestick Park. You can see they basically did the same thing. Far in the distance, there's downtown San Francisco. All the way over here, here's Candlestick Park in a sea of parking in a neighborhood where they definitely, they definitely did not go out of their way to just make it in as remote area of the city as possible. Now, here is Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You can see a lot of similarities. They're all round. The only reason Dodger Stadium isn't, why it doesn't have the full enclosure, is because it was designed to be baseball only. The Dodgers own this land, and they will own it for forever. They're never going to leave Dodger Stadium. We will get into that later. They own, that's why I think Dodger Stadium is one of the better of the era, even though it was awful, because it was at least designed to be baseball first and foremost. These were multi-use stadiums. When the cities gave the money to the team to help build the stadium, they said, okay, we'll give you the money for the stadium, but you got to have a partner here. You got to have another team here so that we can save money having one stadium for two teams. So Candlestick Park, this wasn't just the home of the Giants. This was also the home of the 49ers who play in the NFL. Three Rivers Stadium. This was not just the home of the Steelers. This was also the home of the Pittsburgh Pirates playing in the MLB. So you would have multiple teams playing here, and because of that, they had to design the stadium to be big, multi-use complexes that wouldn't just be used for baseball, but football as well. In a lot of ways, they were the futon of stadium design, in that they were designed to be two things at once, and in that sense, were good at being neither. This is the Oakland Coliseum. The Oakland Coliseum is the last remaining multi-use stadium. You can argue whether or not Tropicana Field in Tampa Bay, Florida, or the Tampa Bay area in Florida, also fits this design. It has seen teams outside of the Rays play there. In fact, I believe it played hockey games before the MLB played there, but it was designed, to court a baseball team. So I don't know. You could argue it either which way. I think the real final stand of the concrete ashtray stadiums is the Oakland Coliseum, and the Oakland Coliseum is so indicative of what we're talking about. You can see the sea of parking around here. There is not a neighborhood for miles. And you can see how the stadium was designed to be very multi-use. It's one of the biggest for pure seating, because NFL games tend to, because they only play once a week, and it's the most popular sport in America. It has much higher attendance. And so they made it very huge to accommodate both NFL and MLB games. But then they also had to change it. They had to change the stadium many times to make it even more pro football. That giant part where it just has the big athletics font in the outfield, that was not originally there. They added it to add more seating because the Raiders, who used to play here in the Coliseum in Oakland, they were complaining that they weren't getting enough seats for people who wanted to come to games. And so they demanded that giant evil mountain be built in the outfield. And so, yeah, this is the last stand of the concrete ashtrays. And most people say it's the worst stadium in baseball. And I think it probably is, just in terms of like the architecture of it. Whenever you go, it's kind of hard not to notice the sheer amount of concrete and barbed wire. It feels a lot like a prison. And I will be very happy when the Coliseum is finally renovated for whoever buys it after the A's are gone, or just demolished altogether. It's kind of sickening that this is what it's fallen to, given how much history has been played at the Coliseum with the A's there. But it's what it is. It's very unfortunate. Yeah. So this was the next movement in stadium design and stadium architecture. This is Oriole Park at Camden Yards in Baltimore, Maryland. You can see how a lot of it changed from this massive concrete ashtray in a sea of parking, to this trying to return to the city center. You can see downtown Baltimore there. You can see also, if this was the modernist concrete ashtray, and before that you had the jewel box design. Here with Baltimore Oriole Park and Camden Yards, they decided to try and go closer to the jewel box design in what became known as the retro modern design. Now, some of the fixtures you can see, again, the return to downtown. You can see downtown featured prominently on the outfield, but you can also see how they tried to make it a little bit more compact into the city grid. In right field, that series of buildings, those are real offices. Camden Yards this was a real industrial place where people worked, and they just put a ballpark right next to it in order to simulate how it really felt to be watching a game back during the jewel box era in a jewel box stadium ballpark. There are a couple of things they also tried to emulate from the jewel box design. For one, this is sort of minor, but I think it is very important to a lot of the nostalgia of the era that the retro modern design is trying to capture. You can see on the scoreboard, they have that clock. And that is something that did get lost in the concrete ashtray designs. They were made to be so big. A lot of the scoreboards were very generic, and they didn't have fixed ones. But you can see when we go back here, I actually don't think I got an angle. That should come up in a future slide. But you can see, yeah, there it is. This is Wrigley Field. You can see how their scoreboard, which is one of the most famous and iconic scoreboards in the MLB, you can see how it had that clock featured very prominently, and they try to get that back on the scoreboard for the retro modern design. And why this was such an important point of nostalgia is because, again, baseball was thought of as a leisurely sport. It was thought as that you can just on any day be like, hey, it sounds chill to just go down to the ballpark and catch a little bit of a game. Maybe not even the whole game. Maybe leave a little early. Maybe you've got something to do after and you would want to keep time to see what's going on after. Or maybe if you're a real baseball fanatic and you want to pay attention to where your team lies in the standings, you want to see what the National League standings are, what the American League standings are, who's playing, what the score is, and keeping track that way. And so most of these classic scoreboards in jewel box stadiums would also have the standings for both the National and American Leagues. Everything here was completely analog. People still love it today. It's still there in Wrigley Field today. They preserved it as part of their renovations. We'll get to that. But yeah, you can see how they tried to both take that design and also try and modernize it a bit. You can see in the right field wall where they have the standings to try and emulate that right there next to the advertisement for the hot dog and above the university advertisement. But also how like this was completely analog. You can see someone actually taking out for the Arizona versus Los Angeles game, someone taking out the individual planks to start updating it. And you know, that's also a part of the charm. Still to this day, I believe this scoreboard remains analog in Wrigley Field. They didn't want to bother with that in Oriole Park. They just wanted to have the elements, but also modernize it a bit with electric signs. This is Oracle Park in San Francisco, where the Giants play. I think that this is one of the big examples, perhaps the best example of retro modern ballpark, and the ways in which they wanted to get back to the classical elements and nostalgic elements of the Jewel Box era. You can see, like Camden Yards, they have that same brick facade that wasn't here during the concrete ashtray modernist era. They brought back the brick facades to imitate that design of the Jewel Box era, because most Jewel Box era ballparks were built with brick and wood, basically. You can see how they also got that scoreboard. This one is designed to look analog. I actually forget if this is analog or electric. I believe it is analog, but I may be wrong on that. So just take my words with a grain of salt. But yeah, you can see how they wanted to mimic that element in Levi's Landing as well, the part of the right field wall. And then, of course, they have that clock as well as part of the scoreboard. And another important part of the scoreboard, I think, people will disagree with me, but I think that this is a very funny and important part of the scoreboard. It's just that they would have a bunch of advertisements littered all a part of it. You can see this even back with the original postcards. I actually don't think this one shows it, but in Ebbets Field, there were a bunch of advertisements all over the wall. In Fenway Park, you can't see it either because this view obfuscates it. Hopefully I'll have a slide later on that shows it better. But they would have advertisements lining all over the wall and the scoreboard. And you can see it here. That's another thing they wanted to mimic. And I think that this is really important because I just think it's funny. It just amuses me greatly that they would dedicate so much space on this giant scoreboard to advertisements. And this is something that is slowly getting phased out of retro modern ballparks as they try to most of the screens are getting huge. And they're dedicated exclusively to stats and the player and da-da-da-da. But I think that this was an important part of the Jewel Box designs, how much of them were just dedicated to relentless advertising. And I am a little saddened by the fact that they're trying to get rid of the ads, because I think it's funny. I think it makes me feel at home when I look up at the scoreboard and I see PG&E, which is a state-sponsored terrorist organization. Anyway. So back to Coors Field. You can see now that Coors Field is trying to mimic the retro modern design. You can see how it has that brick facade. It has the clock as part of the exterior. This was the scoreboard. You can see how it was littered with all of those advertisements. It doesn't have the clock, but it follows the same basic idea. This is how it looks now. I hate it. I hate the fact that they got rid of the ads and just made a giant screen. I will never forgive them for that. And there are a couple of features also of Coors Field that make it unique. As all ballparks are, of course, they always try to have these unique elements. Out in out in center field, of course, you can see the fountains. Those are part of a broader, garden that they try to do. It's supposed to represent the Rocky Mountains, and I think it's cute. Everyone who's ever been there has said that it's a lot more pretty in person, and I think this is the time to admit that I've never been to Coors Field. It's very high on the list of my go-tos, but I've never been. So this is just the babbling of an insane person, and you're just gonna have to forgive that. And there have been a lot of interesting things that happen in Coors Field because Coors Field is not like any other ballpark. Why? Even though like it very much tries to be, you can see after Oriole Park at Camden Yards, the retro modern style took over, and you can see how Coors Field, as I mentioned, is trying to imitate that also and do the retro modern design. I think that this is funny because, of course, the Rockies are a new franchise. They came about in 1993, and they were not around for the jewel box era to know what those jewel box designs were like. So the fact that they try to imitate this is just kind of one of those things that is like, what would people be nostalgic about in your case when the ballpark was never, you never had that history with a jewel box design? But that's neither here nor there. I also understand that the retro modern design is just very popular in general. It became the new fad. But despite the fact that Coors Field tries to be a standard retro modern ballpark, it isn't. It isn't at all. It has a lot of unique properties as part mostly of the geography of Denver, Colorado. And me personally, I think that this is really where the fun begins for me because, for this presentation, I love the history of ballparks, but I understand how, there's not a crazy ton of jokes to make. There's not a crazy ton of wacky shit happening. It's mostly just we had a good thing and then we destroyed it and then we tried to rebuild that good thing to mostly success, but I have some more intricate thoughts that I'll get into soon. But now that we actually get to talk about Coors Field, now that we understand where it came from, the design that it's trying to imitate, and how that's better than what came before, but also worse than what came before. Now we get to talk about the fun part, which is why Coors is so wacky, kooky, crazy, goofy. So what is so distinct about Coors Field? Well, mostly just that they play in Denver, Colorado. Denver, Colorado is huge. They call it the Mile High City for a reason. Denver, Colorado is actually way more than a mile. I believe it is not exactly, but roughly 5,800 feet above sea level, which is a lot. That's a lot of feet. I may be lying to you. I don't know. Just in case, we're just going to throw that out there. But yeah, it is a lot. The next highest stadium above sea level is Chase Field, where the Diamondbacks play, and that's only about 1,000 feet above sea level. Not even remotely comparable to where Coors Field sits above sea level. And so things change when you're that high up. For one, it creates a much better offensive environment. Rockies hitters do a lot of crazy shit. Fun fact, the Rockies are the only team in all of baseball to have more batting titles than postseason wins. That's not a good thing. It is a funny thing, though. And so, of course, we're just going to look through some of the profound performances that Rockies players have demonstrated. Here's what Todd Helton did in the year 2000. He batted .372 to win the batting title that year. That's insane. I want to remind you that this was during the steroid era. He was playing not only during the steroid era, but in particular during an era where Barry Bonds would proceed to win 4 consecutive MVPs in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. He was playing in the same league and in the same division as Barry Bonds, and yet somehow he still outdid him in terms of triple slash and RBIs and hits and doubles. Like, he had more total bases in the same league and in the same division as Barry Bonds. Peak Barry Bonds. That's crazy. And he did it. I mean, he was a very talented player no matter what. But also, he did get a little bit of help from Coors Field. Now, of course, I would be foolish not to talk about, or I would be foolish to talk about Coors Field and Colorado Rockies batting titles and not talk about Larry Walker, arguably the king of Colorado Rockies batting titles. Now, of course, he would win the batting title 3 times, 363, 379, and 350 in a 4-year span. That's crazy. And even crazier is the fact that in 1997, he won MVP and batted 366 and still somehow didn't win the batting title that year. Like, that was just a crazy year for Tony Gwynn, I believe it was. Good for him, good for Mr. Padre. But, like, the batting numbers in Coors Field, this was an insane offensive environment. And you can see it reflected in his OPS plus. Because, I mean, these are great numbers. If you get any of this, you're very, very happy. But for a man with these numbers, you would actually expect his OPS plus to be higher. They're actually punishing him a bit for his overall offensive production because he played in Coors Field. And then we have Andres Galarraga. Galarraga is, I think, perhaps the biggest Coors Field fraud of all time. This is a guy who had himself a nice career. A nice career. He's not a Hall of Fame or anything. He's not crazy. He was a great first baseman. He was just a very nice first baseman. And you can look at his numbers and you can see that he was solid throughout his career. But he didn't tend to bat insane numbers like, 370. There's just this one humongous outlier year where he won the batting title his first year playing in Coors Field in 1993. So yes, Coors Field is known for being the hitter's park to end all hitter's park. The offensive environment there goes crazy. So how do you pitch there? Well, over the years, the Colorado Rockies have become infamous for ruining pitching. Coors Field is known as where good pitching goes to die. This man's name is Jeff Hoffman. Jeff Hoffman was picked up by the Colorado Rockies to be a backstop in the bullpen. I don't know why it took me so long to get to bullpen. We're just gonna laugh at that. It's my stumbling is funny. They picked him up to be a good reliever out of the bullpen when they were looking at some competitive years, and he had a nice career before he came to Colorado. And then once he got to Colorado, he shat the bed. His numbers exploded, and he was never the same again. This, of course, is Wade Davis. Wade Davis had a very nice career. He was one of the best relievers in baseball for the Kansas City Royals during their championship years. He was a phenomenal player, a phenomenal closer, a phenomenal reliever. He was incredible. And then the Rockies paid him off, and his numbers were awful. The first year he came back, he had a 4-something ERA. Not what you want for your closer. Like, those aren't bad numbers if you're a rookie starter still learning your way through, or even like an inconsistent bullpen arm who's mostly solid but has had some bad outings. For your closer, a 4 ERA is atrocious and awful, and you want nothing to do with it. But it only got worse. The more years he spent in Coors, the more washed he became. And eventually they just got rid of him. They didn't even let him fulfill the rest of his contract. He was so bad, so ruined by Coors Field that he was irredeemably awful. And even once another team picked him up when the Rockies dropped him, I believe he returned to Kauffman Stadium playing for the Royals, who had really built his career. He was just never the same again. And the reason why is because when you play at a higher altitude, a lot of things change. The Magnus force, or the Magnus effect, which is the driving force behind spin rates that makes the ball go spinny, 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 spinny. and have a big effect on how the ball looks being thrown out of the pitcher's hand. Spin rates have a lot to decide of how the batter sees the ball. They get massively cucked by the higher altitudes. Another thing is just that at higher altitude, air resistance is cut. And so you've got a situation where balls just stay up for longer. They hang a lot more. And hanging balls are the easiest balls to hit. If a ball hangs, that's how it gets, pummeled into the outfield. This is especially important for breaking balls like curve balls, sliders, anything that's designed to look like a fastball and then drop out. Whoa, it broke, it dropped. It's going to have a lot less break being thrown at a higher altitude. And then the final thing about pitching at a high altitude is that balls just go further. There's less air resistance, so they just go like 20% further in Coors Field, and that 20% makes a lot of difference in the difference between a double and a home run. So that's very important. And all of those things just make pitching at Coors Field very hard, very, very hard. So this is the Colorado Rockies. I don't know why I said the Colorado Rockies. This is Coors Field in all of its glory, in all of its splendor. And the reason why I'm showing you this image is because I want you to take note of just how comically large the outfield is. Coors Field has the largest outfield of any ballpark in the MLB. They give you a lot of ground to cover here. Why do they do this? They do this because balls get hit harder there. Balls go further there than any other ballpark because of the altitude, because of the decreased air resistance. And so because of that, they made a comically large ballpark with the biggest dimensions of any ballpark in the majors. For reference, this is Wrigley Field. Again, the last of the two remaining jewel box stadiums in the major leagues. You can see how the outfield, this is like a little bit below average outfield compared to the standard dimensions, but it's still very average. A little bit below average is fine. This is a good comparison, I feel, and you can see how Coors Field just fucking dominates it. It's so huge. It's comically large, the way they design the outfield. This is the great nation of Taiwan, peace be upon her. And I bring it up to mention, just because this is my idea of a humid place, I guess. And this is another problem that they had throwing at high altitudes, which is that at the high altitudes, the ball is just a lot more dry, and dry balls just get hit a lot further. So they had to humidify it a bit. And this is true. In Coors Field, they have a magical vault. They have a magical secret vault where they have a giant humidor in there. And this is where all of the game balls that are going to be played in a Rockies home game, all of the balls that you can use in that game, they keep them in a vault with a humidor to just make the balls humid and just a little bit more usable. And this was not always in Coors Field. They added it in 2003. And so because of that, you can notice a big difference pre-humidor and post-humidor in offensive numbers. Because before the humidor, Coors Field had the most home runs of any ballpark by far, by like a comical amount. They were giving away home runs for free. It was so easy to hit a home run there. I could probably hit a home run there. And then post-humidor, they still tend to be in the upper echelon of home runs, but at least it's a lot easier to keep the ball in the park. And the total overall offensive environment has gone down since they started humidifying the balls. So this man, his name is Kyle Freeland, and I bring him up to mention that, you might be thinking at this point, well, okay, if Coors Field is such a hard place to pitch and such an easy place to hit, has there ever been a pitcher who conquered Coors Field, who absolutely annihilated Coors Field, who made it his own and made it a part of his game? And there is. It was Kyle Freeland for 1 year in 2018. Kyle Freeland in 2018 was incredible. He had an under 3 ERA. I believe it was 2.8 ERA with over 200 innings pitched. He pitched a lot of innings at way better than average, like really, really, really good ERA numbers. And the magical thing about 2018 Kyle Freeland is that he was the only player in Colorado Rockies history to pitch at this elite level at home. There are other good Rockies pitchers. We'll get into a couple of them later on in the presentation, but they always did better away than they did home. And this is very normal for Rockies pitchers. Very abnormal in the rest of baseball history. To this day, the Rockies are the only team in baseball to year after year, without fail, every single year in their history, have a better, their overall pitching staff collectively have better numbers away than they do home. This is very weird. This almost never happens with every other team in the league. But for the Colorado Rockies, it's just an expectation that they will do worse pitching-wise at home than away. And that's funny. That's comical. That makes me laugh. I think that's deserving of a hee-hee-hee. But Kyle Freeland, of course, was different. During his legendary 2018 campaign where he conquered Coors Field, he actually had an even better ERA at home than he did on the road. So he made Coors Field a part of his game and understood its dimensions and how he wanted to throw in Coors Field. This man is Ubaldo Jimenez. He's the other really good Rockies pitcher. The Rockies have only got like 3, maybe 4 good pitchers in their entire history, and he's one of the other ones. He also had a really good Cy Young caliber year in 2010. He started the year by throwing a no-hitter, the only no-hitter in Rockies history, but unfortunately not the only no-hitter in Coors Field history. Coors Field still has not seen a no-hitter to this day. Now, of course, Ubaldo Jimenez, incredible year in 2018 or 2010, very similar in caliber to Kyle Freeland's 2018. Some people say Ubaldo's year is better. I think they're wrong. But you can argue the difference. They were very, very similar years. They both very elite years. The difference why I think Kyle Freeland's year in 2018 was better was because Kyle Freeland pitched better at home. He was very comfortable in Coors Field, whereas Ubaldo Jimenez still had a good ERA at home. That'll happen to you when you're just a great pitcher having a great year. But his road ERA was better and was what made his numbers look so good. So he did do worse at Coors Field. Now, I'm just going to go over a little bit of an interesting story while we're talking about Coors Field history and why I think it's such a magical place. So while Coors Field was being constructed, everything was going well. They acquired the site and everything was going to plan. And the architect, the guy heading the project, is just chilling out in his office when he gets a call from one of the people on the site. And basically, he gets this call saying, "Hey, guy, we've got some news for you. So that ballpark that we're trying to build here, and how we're excavating the site to try and build out a strong foundation. While we were digging out and excavating, we found fucking bones. we found fucking bones all over the site. So we don't know what to do with that." And so the guy heading the project, he gets this call, and he just hangs up on the fly. He's like, "Okay, cool, thanks for fucking with me. I don't believe you." But they call him back, and he's like, "No, for real, on God, we found fucking bones at the site." And so, rather than they got to scout it out. Rather than freak out, he's like, "Okay, let's get this analyzed. Let's see what's up." Because I don't want to be building a ballpark if it turns out that the site is on top of a massive graveyard. And what they found was that these were actually Triceratops bones. They were dinosaur bones. And they were like, "Whoa, this is actually really cool. This is awesome." And that's why their mascot is Dinger the Dinosaur. They just found random dinosaur bones under Coors Field when they were excavating the site and getting ready to build it out. And they were like, "That's our mascot, Dinger, baby. Let's go, baby." And I think that's cool. I don't know. I think that's a little neat. I think that's a little cool. I think that's a little goofy, maybe even. So now we're going to talk about another very funny thing about Coors Field, which is the fact that Coors Field, I think, is what we colloquially refer to in the biz as a forever ballpark. Now, what is a forever ballpark? It's basically what it sounds like. It's Fenway Park, and you can see those advertisements that I was talking about littering all over the Green Monster. The Red Sox will never leave Fenway Park. It is their forever ballpark. You can see it in Dodger Stadium. The Dodgers will never leave Dodger Stadium. It is a forever ballpark for them. You can also see it with Wrigley Field. They will never leave Wrigley Field. They have made sure of that. It is their forever ballpark. What are the qualities that make a forever ballpark? Well, a couple of things. One, you've got to have a big financial incentive to stay. The Red Sox can't leave. They literally can't. It would be massive amounts of money that the city would not be willing to put anything forward in order to try and build a new ballpark anywhere else. It literally just would not be possible. The city of Boston is too dense. Any potential neighborhoods they would want to look at would just be a massive pain in the ass. And they've already got it right here, so they're not going to leave. Dodger Stadium, the Dodgers own the land. They own the land. They are able to make profits off of every part of it without paying rent to the city. They can do whatever they want to the ballpark, and they don't have to consult the city first because they own the land, and that's a big incentive for them. So they're never going to leave because they own the site, and that's a big moneymaker for them. And the Cubs aren't going to leave because they tried to and it didn't work out. They tried to leave and they said, city, give us money. And the city said no. And they tried to leave and they said, state, give us money. And the state said no. So they said, okay, well, I guess we're not going to get money to leave. We might as well renovate Wrigley Field. And so they did. They made the renovation so that it could withstand another 100 years. And so they're going to stay there forever just because they couldn't get the money to leave. So why do I think Coors Field is a forever ballpark? Well, I think Coors Field shares a lot of similarities with another forever ballpark that's actually fairly recent. You know, all of these ballparks, these are the oldest ballparks. The Wrigley Field is the oldest ballpark in the National League. Dodger Stadium is the second oldest ballpark in the National League. And Fenway Park is the oldest ballpark in baseball and the oldest ballpark in the American League. But here's a young forever ballpark, Oracle Park in San Francisco. This is a forever ballpark, I think. And one of the things about Oracle Park is that they couldn't leave if they could not get another stadium built if they wanted to. The Giants in 1992 were dead set on leaving San Francisco. They already sold the team to a Tampa Bay ownership group, and they were ready. They were selling season tickets as the Tampa Bay Giants. They already had a stadium, Tropicana Park, or Tropicana Field, I forget which is which, where the Rays play today. They had everything set up. They were going to be there. They were going to be the Tampa Bay Giants. And at the last second, they got cocked. The National League said, no, you have to stay in San Francisco. And so they built Oracle Park. And they had to because the whole reason why they were trying to leave San Francisco in the first place is because the city would not give them money to build a new ballpark. They said Candlestick Park is awful, which it was. And we want to build something new. And they demanded money from the city, and the city wouldn't give it to them. So they went to San Jose, and they said, hey, we'll be the San Jose Giants. Give us money. We'll stay in the Bay Area, just be in San Jose. Give us money, and we'll be the San Jose Giants and build the ballpark here. And they made a ballot measure go to the voters, and voters of San Jose said, no, we're not going to give you money. And they just did this song and dance forever until it became very clear that they were not going to get any city in the Bay Area to give them money. So they tried to go to Tampa Bay. And when the National League owners shut that down, it became the case that they had to get a private ownership group to completely privately finance a ballpark. You can't do that more than once. Like, there's no way they're going to be able to get another $1 billion to build another Oracle Park, a couple decades from now. So they'll stay here forever. It was already a Herculean task to get this ballpark built this big, this beautiful, in this location, right adjacent to downtown. Completely privately financed. It was already so hard to do that. They're not going to do it again. They're not going to test their luck. They did it once. They nailed it the first time. They're not looking to leave. Coors Field has a lot of those elements. It's already, right adjacent to downtown. It would be very hard to get them to leave because any ballpark they would build would have to be really big, like Coors Field was, in order to make, that comically great offensive environment work out. When people are hitting the ball so hard and so deep, you need to make a big stadium in order to, be able to hold that. And so wherever they would build a successor to Coors Field would have to demolish a lot of neighborhoods. And because of that, it would be very hard, especially in a city as NIMBY as Denver, to get that built. They've already got it. Coors Field is already pretty routinely renovated, pretty routinely maintained, pretty well maintained. Believe it or not, Coors Field is actually, I fucking lost my mind when I realized this, but it is the third oldest ballpark in the National League already. It is Wrigley Field, Dodger Stadium, and then Coors Field. It opened in 1995, which doesn't feel that, long ago, but, that makes it the third oldest ballpark in the National League. And so because of that, it's already got some of those elements of a good bit of history here. It would be very hard to build out elsewhere. And I think the ownership group sees that because when the time came to choose between trying to build a new stadium or extending the lease in 2017, they decided to extend the lease another 30 years. So by the time the lease runs out, the Coors Field will be 52 years old. That's a pretty good age for a ballpark. And they'll probably be looking to ask the city for renovations in order to re-extend the lease rather than build elsewhere. So, all of that said, I think Coors Field will end up being a forever ballpark, which is very funny because you would not think that Coors Field, the comically goofy Coors Field where pitching goes to die and hitting reigns supreme, and where the team that plays there is not very good. The Colorado Rockies are routinely a pretty bad team historically. I think it turns into a forever ballpark. I think that's pretty funny. But despite that, what are some of the, put the quality of the team aside. Every ballpark has some magic moments that you build a community around. Even if the team is bad, people get invested in it. People love, following bad teams because there's a sense of community and watching these young, exciting players develop and become big players for your franchise, even if the franchise as a whole isn't that good. There's always something to get excited for and something to build a community around. And so what are some of those magic moments that people, start making into folklore? And that's another very important part of having a sports team, which is that these moments become community lore, that are talked about for generations. And what are some of those moments that Coors Field has hosted that are forever going to be a part of this ballpark's history? Well, one such magic moment, regretfully, is the only no-hitter thrown in Coors Field history. Ubaldo Jimenez did not throw this one. He only threw one no-hitter, and it was not in Coors Field. It was against the Atlanta Braves in their ballpark. The only no-hitter thrown was thrown by a Dodger, disgustingly, thrown by Hideo Nomo. But, that says a lot in and of itself. Coors Field has never had a perfect game. That is a part of its history that remains yet to be written, and that I think is going to be very interesting when it finally happens. Like, that's going to be a canon event in Rockies history, as well as when they get a no-hitter thrown in Coors Field by a Rockies pitcher. Then of course there's Rocktober, baby, Rocktober. This was the most important moment in Colorado Rockies history, and so I'm just going to do a brief history of Rocktober to explain what this means to Rockies fans, what this means to the city of Denver, because Rocktober was huge. So the basic idea behind Rocktober was that in 2007 the Rockies were not seriously competing for the division for most of the year. It was mostly between the Padres and the Diamondbacks, who would take turns throughout the year taking the division lead from each other. The Rockies were pretty mediocre for most of the year. By the halfway point, by the All-Star break, they were exactly like 24-24, or rather 44-44, pardon me. They were exactly 500, exactly even. They were playing just 500 ball, mediocre ball, average ball. And then in the second half, they went fucking crazy. They had a 46-29 second half, and from September 16th to 27, they had to go on an 11-game winning streak. They had to win every single game for an 11-game stretch in order to be competitive in the National League wild card. And so for those who don't know, baseball used to be based. These days, how it works is you have 3 wild card spots. And because there's such an expanded, there's so many wild card spots, you've got the expanded playoff format. It's pretty easy to get into the postseason, and there's always going to be one team that's just absolute cheeks, absolute ass, bro. They're so dark. Last year it was the Diamondbacks. They won like 83, 84 games. They were very mediocre. They did not deserve to be in the postseason at all, but they had the 3rd best record of the teams that weren't the division winners, and so they got the last wild card spot, and they took that all the way into winning the pennant that year. They shouldn't have. They didn't belong there. It was crazy. MLB will ruin everything we love and hold dear, but that's how it is these days. That is not how it was back in 2007. Back in 2007, men were men. Back in 2007, you had 1 wild card spot per league, just 1. And if you had a tie, you played a game 163. As I said, there were 162 games in a season, and so if you tied, in order to see who has the best record, you would play 1 more best of 1 regular season game, and whoever won that would win the wild card and go into the postseason. And it was peak. It was dramatic. It was fucking awesome every time. Game 163s were excellent. They were peak baseball. We never should have gotten rid of them. They had the exact right mixture. We need to just go back to the 1 wild card spot, and if you tie, you play a game 163. That shit was fire. And I hope my explanation of this particular game 163 will help illuminate that, because the Rockies win 11 games in a row, and then they do all of that just to tie with the Padres for the exact same record. And tied for the best team in the wild card spot. Now, this is actually pretty funny because there was a lot going in the National League in the final stretch. For example, the Mets were really good that year. They were looking to take the National League Eastern Division. They had a 7-game lead in their division and only 17 games left in the season. That's when you're playing that good and you've got that much of a lead, it's really hard to drop that. But somehow the Mets had it's classic Mets. It's law Mets, right? They had a humongous collapse that saw them not only drop out of the division, and I'll remind you, they had a 7-game lead in the division with only 17 games left to go. Not only did in those 17 games did they lose so hard, so many times, that they dropped the division, they also placed exactly 88 and 74, which means they were a single game behind the Rockies and the Padres in the wild card race. The Rockies and Padres were tied at 89 and 73. The Mets were just 1 game away from tying with them. It was so peak. If the Mets had, I believe it was the Marlins, that they were playing in the final regular season game. And if they had beat the Marlins, then they would have had to do a 3-way tiebreaker with both the Padres and the Rockies, which would have been so peak. That would have been so fire. It would have been peak baseball. But instead we got just classic Mets. They had everything set out for them, and they completely shat the bed at the last second. So instead it's the Rockies and the Padres alone tying for a game 163, which is so peak. Now, what went down in this tie-breaking game? This is like, everybody knows that this game is sick, but I still feel like it's pretty underrated because this is one of the best it's not technically postseason games. You know, the nature of a game 163 does mean that it was technically regular season, but whatever. I think of it in my mind as a postseason game. It has the vibes of a postseason game, and it's one of the best postseason baseball games of all time if you think of it that way, because it was action-packed. It started out in the first inning with the Rockies getting the bases loaded. And then a sac fly and a single, allowing the Rockies to go up 2-0. And then they tacked on again in the second. So 3-0 game going into the third inning. Not too bad. That's doable. How do the Padres respond? You know, it's still early, still opportunities for them to come back. Well, the Padres in the third inning just go fucking insane. Adrian Gonzalez hit a grand slam to make them go up 4-3, and then they got another single to score another run and make them go up 5-3. Huge grand slam in a game 163 by Adrian Gonzalez, and this was his first career grand slam or peak baseball. But then it keeps going. The Rockies in the third inning, bottom of the third, they slap back. Todd Helton, my GOAT. He hits a homer to close the gap by another run. Now it's a 1-run gap, 5-4 game at the bottom of the third inning. Fourth inning on both sides, shutout. But then in the fifth inning, Padres don't score, Rockies do to tie it 5-5. And then they tack another one on in the sixth to go up 5-6 or 6-5. This was at Coors Field, so it would be 6-5 with the Rockies being named first. Seventh inning, zeros on the board, but then the Padres come back to tie it again in the eighth with a Trevor Hoffman blown save. Oh my God. It's so peak. Tied 8-8, bottom of the eighth inning. What more could you ask for? This is peak baseball. Pardon me. I'm sorry, I lied. It's tied 6-6, I believe. Let me count it in my head. Yeah, 6-6 at the bottom of the eighth. Peak baseball, okay? But then they keep going. The ninth inning goes on with more zeros on the board, which means that, they have to go into extra innings. I cannot even begin to describe how incredible this is. Not only is this a high-scoring game, not only is this a very competitive game, but it is a highly competitive game 163 with everything on the line that goes into extra innings. Padres come out in the 13th swinging, get another 2 runs on the board to go up 8-6. But then the Rockies score. It's just so incredibly peak. 3 runs at the bottom of the 13th to make the final score 8-9. Biggest moment. I mean, I think it personally, biggest moment in Rockies history. You could argue it one way or the other about between this and what would come after. But I personally think that this is the most hype moment in Rockies history. And you can see the man who scored the final run. I believe that is Troy Tulowitzki. You can see just he also got injured on this play, but you can see just the wave of emotions coming over him, the rest of the Rockies, when he scored that run and touched home plate. And then they kept going. After winning that game 163 and coming in as the wild card, they went undefeated. I believe they didn't drop a single game in the postseason, all the way to winning the pennant in a sweep of the Arizona Diamondbacks. This is Todd Helton catching the final out at first to win the first pennant ever in Rockies history. And I believe still the only. Yes, still the only. This is the only time they've made it to the World Series. And this happened both the game 163 and pennant clinching final game 4 of the NLCS. Both of them happened in Coors Field. So Coors Field saw both of these historic moments in Rockies history. Now, just briefly, I gotta unfortunately say that what happened after is not so fun. It was a very competitive series between the Rockies and the Red Sox, but in Coors Field, the Red Sox would come out on top and win the 2007 World Series. Again, very competitive, very, very close World Series, very good World Series, one of the best World Series of all time. But unfortunately, the Rockies did not win their first World Series, just their first pennant, being National League champions here. But still, this is a very important moment in Rockies history. And Coors Field saw all of this. They saw all of the glory, all of the horror, all of the beauty of the 2007 Rockies. And that's forever going to be entrenched in Rockies history. They also saw, this is another fun moment in Coors Field history, Ichiro Suzuki. He got his 3,000th hit in Coors Field. He got it as a triple. He hustled all the way to third base. I believe this hit was fucking skied all the way to the right field wall. And he earned that shit. This guy, great player, Marlins legend, Ichiro Suzuki. And, you know, he had a historic career. His campaign for 3,000 hits was historic. And this is where it happened. So what did we learn here? We learned that baseball stadiums are cool. They're cool places to just go and vibe, and they're cool places to go see incredible players do incredible things. They're a great place to make a sense of community and be involved in a sense of active fandom where everyone is united in loving of their city, of their team, to represent, the city. And it's just, a lot of history happens here. It's a place where you get to go see, real life superheroes do insane shit, and a place where you get to vibe with your boys. So I guess all we've really learned is that ballparks are cool, and I like them.